But first, I want to trot out a brand new segment on our little show here called Hey, Hero, Your Fly is Open. And the point of this segment is sometimes heroes in our libertarian movement, as great as they are, sometimes they stumble or miss the mark slightly. And gosh darn it, that's why we're here. we can we can maybe pick up the pieces and help smooth things out when they make a tiny little mistake. So we're going to play a little clip here, and it is from a very heroic Dave Smith's part of the Problem podcast. And he is talking about the hierarchy of importance in problems in the world and why he and Robbie focus on the most important things and other people's complaints are just not as important, and he's justifying his stance. So here we go.
And this is one of the things that I always try to do. This is, but I get it from my hero. It's all from Ron Paul, because it was always like the example that he set was that you always talk about the most important things. You always put the most emphasis on the most important things, you know? And this is where the woke people fail. This is where the anti-woke people fail. This is what we were talking about when we were calling out that guy who was criticizing me on Twitter, where, we were talking about in that episode, we were like, yes, dude, like dudes shouldn't be able to compete with girls in swimming contests. Okay. I agree with you. But believe it or not, there are things out there that are a lot more important than the dude swimming with the chicks. Like banker bailouts are more important than the dude swimming with the chicks. Wars are more important than that. And this is like where people get their priorities just all wrong. And sometimes the answer is as simple as just being like, oh, that doesn't matter that much. That doesn't matter. And there's just a hierarchy of priorities. And if you're like, someone at a college campus with a college student was offended by something that was said. It's like, oh yeah, that doesn't matter. That's okay, because it doesn't matter at all. And if your thing is like, oh, my feelings were hurt, it's like, oh, okay, cool. That doesn't matter. It just doesn't even register. It's not even low on the hierarchy. It's just not on there. Doesn't matter at all.
Okay, so there's Dave, and he's saying that, quote, dudes shouldn't be able to compete with girls in swimming contests. He agrees with that point, but that things like banker bailouts and wars and, the machinations of the Fed are much worse. And I totally agree with that. But then he makes a little bait and switch, because as he's talking, he's thinking back to this guy who complained that he wasn't taking, the issue seriously of these men, these trans people competing in women's sports. And he was, defending himself because other things are more important. And he says, in fact, and as he's talking about that issue, trans people in sports, he switches back and he says, because now he's talking about woke leftists and their hurt feelings on college campuses. And he says, the issue doesn't matter much. It doesn't even register. It's not even low on the hierarchy. It's just not even there. And I totally agree with that point. But he was using that example about trans athletes in sports. And I think he was wrong to use that example. He shouldn't, because the trans issue is really, really important. When compared against things like starting wars, dropping bombs, killing people all over the world, and the destruction of currency, maybe it doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but it really is. It may be even more important, because they're trying to destroy the concept of what a woman is in this particular example. And that's a massively big deal. It's Orwellian. We as a species learned the difference between men and women before we learned how to make and manage fire. It's super essential, that distinction. And these trans people aren't just saying, hey, it would be a cool idea to let men compete against women. What they're saying is that these men are women. It's a huge issue. And if you don't believe me, just go find one of these lunatic trans activists online or in person and say, hey, do you have a word that means adult human female? And you watch what happens. You're going to get this explosion of word salad Because no, they don't. That's the whole point. They want to obliterate the concept. And the obliteration of concepts, as I know Dave knows, is super, super important, for at least two reasons. The most basic one is it's gasoline thrown on the identitarian fire that is ripping our entire society and culture apart. We just need much less of that, not much more. But even worse, again, it's concept destruction. It's exactly what they were doing in Orwell's 1984. This kind of stuff breaks people's brains, destroys their ability to think. I am not kidding. And if you destroy the citizen's ability to think and differentiate on concepts and object on principle, then you immediately destroy their ability to resist anything. Once you've gotten a populace to swallow the idea that a man is actually a woman, and not only do they believe that, but they swallow it and never speak out and never object. Once you've gotten them to do that, how are they ever going to object to anything that you do as a totalitarian regime? Um, so I get what Dave's point. Maybe the dudes swimming against the girls isn't that important, but the trans agenda in general is super important. Um, Again, it's at least as important as war and the fiat dollar system and the corruption in Washington. It's a mega crime, destroying the populace's ability to think by obliterating basic concepts upon which not only society but our whole species are formed. That's a big deal. Um, think about it this way: everybody complains about taxes, and most people complain about what they view are useless wars. Maybe they can't make the regime stop doing it to them, but they know it's wrong, right? When your son got dragged off to Iraq and didn't come home, or came home with his mind and body shattered. And they know when taxes are too high. But if you let this trans stuff infect the population so people can't understand what's happening to them, when when they're actually even thinking that Leah Thomas is a woman, just like all those other women in the swim meet, when you've gotten them that bamboozled, they can't think about and perceive reality. Their minds are now just pudding for the regime. So we can't let things like this stand. And don't get me wrong, Dave Smith's a hero. I love that dude. He is our best communicator. Or maybe it's neck and neck him and Tom Woods. I don't know. We'll let him have a little race. But I think it's important, and I hope Dave hears this because, hey, hero, your fly's open.